The Black Sea Peninsula and the neighboring areas are the focus of Ukraine's offensive operations. By attacking the Crimea, Mariupol, Melitopol, Berdyansk, and Donbas regions with long-range missile and unmanned aerial vehicle attacks. In recent days, the Ukrainian armed forces have upset the Russian army's command. At the same time, attacks on Russian cities near the Ukrainian border are common in the face of attacks. Russia has no options. The Ukrainian army is making determined strides forward in its fight for freedom. Attacks on these areas all share the same objective, which is to achieve independence. Attacks by unmanned aerial vehicles on Crimea, which has the key to independence, are escalating. 3 air strikes were conducted last week on Sevastopol's port and the area around the Kerch Bridge. The Russian oil depots and the Sevastopol naval headquarters of the Russian Black Sea Fleet were the objectives of the attacks. There was an oil storage in Cossack Bay in Sevastopol, the location of the first attack in Crimea. Drones from Ukraine attacked this oil station. Explosions were brought on by the drone attack at the oil depot. Strong explosions were followed by enormous flames. It was possible to see the oil facility fire from many locations on the peninsula due to its size when it first started. The fire at the plant is said to have rendered useless 10 oil tanks with a combined capacity of 40.000 tons. The government in Kiev denied being behind this incident. Natalia Humenyuk, a spokeswoman for the Ukrainian Southern Operational Command, claimed that following the explosions in Sevastopol in the Russian-occupied Crimea, Russian warships were reluctant to enter Sevastopol. According to reports, Russian warships have lately been replenishing more frequently at Novorossiysk port than Sevastopol. On the other hand, Ukrainian drones attacked the Kerch Bridge a few days after the explosion in Cossack Bay. It found out that in the wee hours of the previous several days, a Russian oil store situated close to the strategically significant Kerch Strait Bridge, which connects Russia with Crimea, burned down. The governor of the southern Russian region of Krasnodar, Veniamin Kondratyev, shared this startling news in a posting on the Telegram channel. In the village of Volna, close to the port of Taman, an oil storage tank took fire. According to Veniamin Kondratyev, and the fire was deemed to be of the highest degree of difficulty. The fire was started by a drone crash, according to TASS, the official news agency of Russia. Social media sites soon shared pictures of the fire. The magnitude of the fire was exposed by shared pictures. 5 firefighters reportedly put in a lot of effort to put out the fire. Residents of Crimea claimed that the Kerch Strait Bridge witnessed the fire. Neither this strike nor its responsibility was admitted to by Ukraine, but Kiev will have a huge advantage before the forthcoming massive offensive if it can cut off the ships fueling the Russian supply lines. Additionally, a Kremlin official reported that 4 of the 5 drones that were shot down near Jankwi in the Russian-occupied Crimea had their electronic systems blocked. No one was hurt or killed, according to Sergei Aksionov. Although numerous buildings' windows were smashed on the other side, drone assaults in May shook Crimea, according to reports in the official and media. At least 3 of the unmanned vehicles were shot down above the Crimean port city of Sevastopol, and that Russian air defense systems successfully repelled Ukrainian drone attacks. Moscow-founded Sevastopol's Governor Mikhail Razvozhayev claimed on the Telegram messaging service that no property was harmed there. The Crimean Peninsula has not yet received any information about the extent of any damage caused by the attacks. There were no injuries in what Baza, a Telegram group connected to Russian law enforcement, claimed to be a series of strikes on Crimea on May 31st. An oil refinery in southern Russia's Krasnodar territory caught fire. This location is around 200 kilometers from the Crimean border. The regional governor claimed that a drone was probably to blame. Another oil refinery in the Krasnodar territory was struck by a drone once more after being struck in May. However, no harm was done, according to Russian officials. According to local media sources, at least 10 Russian soldiers were hurt on May 10th in what is believed to have been a drone attack on a military training facility in the Voronezh region. A drone that was shooting at civilian facilities in February fell around 100 kilometers outside Moscow, according to the local governor. However, the drama for Russia went beyond the Crimea. Belgorod, which is close to the Ukrainian border, has recently been the target of attacks. The armed forces of Ukraine recently launched fierce artillery assaults in the Belgorod region. The official report surprised a lot of people. Pieces fell on the industrial area of Belgorod as a result of the air defense system's activity. Thankfully, no fatalities or significant damage were recorded. Nevertheless, Kayatnaukar, a nearby village, was hit by 3 rounds, but fortunately no injuries were reported there either. In the village of Razumny, 6 cars were discovered to have damage at the same time as one house's roof. Damage was done to a car and the roofs of 2 homes in the village of Igomenitsa. In any of these events, nobody was hurt. The village of Bagan, Grodok, was bombed on its outskirts in the Borisov district, and the arrival of 3 shells was noted. The UAV discharged an improvised explosive device, but no injuries or property damage were reported. It was noted that 23 persons entered the Volokhanovsky district and shelling caused damage to the settlement of Tikvinka. 3 homes, windows, a gas pipeline and electrical lines were all harmed by this. The power line was cut as a result of 4 mortar shells being launched in the city of Graveron, close to the town of Kazinka. 8 mortar shells were fired at the settlement of Glotovo, although no one was hurt as a result of the firing. 519 shots were fired during the assault on the Shebekinsky urban district. This attack resulted in the deaths of 2 ladies in Novaya Janka and Bezlyudivka. There was a great deal of damage and many homes and vehicles were destroyed. The bombing of the Belgorod region's area is getting worse, according to experts. The attacks in the Belgorod region last week were spearheaded by anti-Kremlin activists. Russian servicemen kidnapped in the Belgorod region were reportedly sent to Ukraine, according to the Russian Freedom Legion. Gladkov, the regional governor of Belgorod, allegedly did not come for the prisoners. According to the Legion of Freedom of Russia, let us remind you that the Russian Volunteer Corps and the Russian Freedom Legion declared the beginning of a new raid on the Belgorod region of Russia on June 1, 2023. The Freedom of Russia Legion and RVC said on June 4, 2023 that they had entered Shebekino suburbs in the Russian Belgorod area on the other side. Authorities claimed that the port city of Berdyansk in the Russian-occupied territory of Zaporizhia, Ukraine, had been struck. Social media videos showed massive smoke clouds emanating from the dock. According to Russian sources, the UK provided Ukrainian Storm Shadow cruise missiles that were used in the assault. 2 warehouses have suffered significant damage as seen on satellite photographs. Around noon, the Ukrainian armed forces attacked Berdyansk. According to official Vladimir Rogov, the city has a commercial port and it is situated on the Azov Sea's northern coast. The port is used by the Kremlin to ship metal and grain from Ukraine to location in Russia and other countries. Russia formally annexed the area last year. Putin's soldiers have not yet fully taken control of the area, though numerous Russian ships were compelled to leave the port as a result of the missile attack. According to the city's military administration, it is alleged that social media video clips depict the attack's aftermath. According to the video footage, a rocket or its components fell on a building site in the port region 150 meters from the Berdyansk seaport's grain terminal. A substantial black smoke cloud can be seen rising from the wharf area in one shot. It has been established that the incident left 9 persons hurt, but no casualties have been indicated thus far. Ivan Fedorov, the mayor of Melitopol, made a comment on the incident in a post on his Telegram account. According to Ivan Fedorov, Berdyansk is currently occupied and is extremely noisy, with explosion sounds audible across the suburbs. In a wry allusion to the raids, Fedorov said cotton bloomed in the port where the Russians exported their loot. Attacks by Ukraine on these areas, especially the Black Sea Peninsula and the border cities, appear to be becoming worse every day. The Ukrainian armed forces' major offensive actions burn the battlefield. According to our reports, the fighting in Zaporizhia will move to Donetsk, from which point Ukrainian forces will march on Luhansk. Finally, the outcome was as anticipated. You are aware that Ukrainian forces attempted to occupy Markivka in order to get access to the battle lines in Luhansk from the Donetsk area. The offensive operations against the Berestov, Zolotarev and Kremenna lines have grown since the Ukrainian forces took control of the city, according to the battlefield, as it currently stands. The Russians are fighting to hold the front lines in Zaporizhia against Ukrainian forces, while also trying to avoid losing Luhansk, which is the second phase of Kiev's major offensive operations. However, Ukrainians are prepared to complete this project on both sides. The Ukrainian forces kept focusing on the start of trenches to the north of this city while stepping up their offensive operations along the Kremenna front line. In other words, after taking Markivka, the Ukrainians created a 120-kilometer attack route from here to Stethof. The Russians were forced to assume a defensive position on several of Luhansk's front lines as a result of the Ukrainian forces' creation of this extensive corridor of attack. A potential abrupt Ukrainian strike worried Moscow. In response to this anticipation from Moscow, the Ukrainian armed forces just launched an amazing drone attack on the city of Istatov, one of the most crucial front lines in the Luhansk conflict. Russian drones' launch pad was destroyed by the Ukrainian defense forces close to the Luhansk village of Zvartava. The Ukrainian Army's 92nd Separate Motor Brigade carried out a successful operation destroying the Russian military station that served as the Statovchi airstrip. The Russian military facility there was destroyed by the 92nd Separate Motor Brigade using Mavic 3 and Mavic 3 drones provided by the UNITED-24 initiative. 2 VSAT antennas were found close to this airbase by the Ukrainian brigade soldiers during the offensive operation. The assault operation then started, as you could have imagined. The Ukrainians have once more destroyed a Russian airbase with their drone army. It is said that Russian servicemen were also killed as a result of the Ukrainian forces' offensive operation because the Russians used this airbase in Stethof to house a large number of soldiers and UAV operators. Therefore, it is assumed that Russian losses go beyond just military hardware. The situation in the area is currently very grave, according to Artem Lasutu, commander of the Luhansk Regional Military Administration. The Russian situation in the Luhansk region was significantly impacted by such a bold operation in the direction of Svatovka-Piansk. This was due to the fact that the Russians were using the airbase which the Ukrainian troops had employed drones to target to carry out airstrikes on the Luhansk front lines. By eliminating this Russian-controlled airbase in Stadiva, the Ukrainians were able to greatly increase the security of the Luhansk airspace. Additionally, as the Russian and Ukrainian forces advanced in Luhansk, it became harder for them to bring supplies and reinforcements from their own borders to this area, as you are aware. Another challenge for Moscow is the existence of free Legion groups supporting Kiev on the Russian border lines. If you oppose the invasion of Ukraine and wish to support the work my team and I do, click here. To put it another way, the Russian army is being obstructed by the Luhansk and Donetsk regions, as well as the Ukrainian-Russian border. In addition, the Russian army's regions of domination and maneuverability are significantly reduced when the Zaporizhzhia events are taken into account. Due in large part to the extensive NATO training and equipment, many in the West already anticipated that Ukraine would see significant success from the outset, although it is too soon to pronounce the success or failure of Kiev's planned operation. Early signals suggest that the Russians should be concerned. What steps is Russia currently taking to stop the Ukrainian army's successful advance? Undoubtedly, Moscow had thoughts of reprisal against Kiev's assault intentions. However, it appears that the Moscow government has few options at the moment to halt Kiev's progress. As a precaution, the Russians are only constructing defensive fortifications along the front lines, which extend as far as Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, and Crimea. However, it is interesting that the defense systems Russia constructed are practically verbatim copies of the defensive strategies used by the Soviet Union during the Cold War. In actuality, the Soviets employed the idea of defense to thwart an assault by superior opponent. Troops, prevent severe casualties, hold significant territory, and establish the right circumstances for a successful offensive. However, this concept is in no way reflected in the Russians' current defensive actions on the Ukrainian battlefield. The security zone is the first area to the left of the attack force. The Russians' goal in this situation is to weaken the aggressors as much as they can by delaying the Ukrainian army and misleading them about the precise positions of the genuine defense. But neither in Luhansk nor in Zaporizhzhia do we see a case that demonstrates this. Even while Russia is still constructing fortifications in these two areas, it is not enough to create the primary line of defense. These defenses are anticipated to feature many bands of strongpoints barriers with dragon teeth and minefields all over them, according to an analysis of the known belts in Russia's primary defense zone. Russia will almost certainly attempt to direct Ukrainian tanks and armored personnel carriers to predetermined spots within and between these generations. The Russians would then maneuver to engage them directly with H-tank and anti-tank fire from the flank on the front lines of Luhansk, Donetsk, and Zaporizhzhia. It is also rumored that the Russians are concealing mobile armored formations, possibly up to battalion size, and these units have not yet been sent into the field. In actuality, this is a dangerous situation for Ukrainians. Although Ukraine opened the Orikhiv sector in the Russian security zone after 3 days, it lost a lot of its mine-clearing equipment over time in these locations. It's possible that the minefields the Ukrainians came across in their main defense positions were significantly denser and coated with fire because there are currently fewer engineering assets available. It is uncertain how Ukraine will be able to breach numerous defense zones at its current strength. Kiev must send additional military supplies to both the front lines in Luhansk and the most remote parts of Orikhiv and Velikonovosilka in Zaporizhzhia in order to make further advances. Zelensky will probably instruct his men to search for additional spots along the line to find a place to breach the initial defensive belt as the Ukrainians continue to try to solve this issue. When a significant portion of Russian defense is turned over to the Ukrainian military as a tactical challenge, Moscow will obviously have a problem. In the meantime, Ukrainian fire will reach even the Russian lines beyond the first barrier line. These days, the Ukrainian battlefield is being used as a fireplace. The Ukrainian armed forces are currently making crucial moves to deal the fatal blow. On the other hand, Russia frequently finds itself unprepared for the surprises of recent days, particularly on the front lines in eastern Ukraine. We can observe the most recent instances of this circumstance in the Donetsk region and Bakhmut, the scene of the bloodiest confrontations. The Ukrainians have largely prevailed. What caused the Ukrainians to abruptly grab the upper hand in Bakhmut, currently regarded as one of the most crucial front lines, if you recall? The Wagner Group and the Russian government were on the verge of a huge crisis the last time they were in this city. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of the Wagner Group, has threatened to pull his mercenaries out of Bakhmut because of a lack of military support. But following these warnings, the Wagner forces were able to acquire the supplies and equipment they need. Prigozhin had requested that his soldiers remain in Bakhmut. The Wagner leader had indicated that the Ukrainians would carry with their attacks despite all of this. However, it is clear that the Russian government did not take Prigozhin's advice seriously. Primarily in the Donetsk region, the Ukrainian Air Force conducted amazing assault operations in the city of Bakhmut. Let's discuss the historical offensive actions carried out by the Ukrainians during the most crucial phases of the conflict. Recently, Ukrainian Air Force planes launched 10 attacks against Russian soldiers and military hardware, as well as 4 attacks against Russian anti-aircraft missile systems. The Ukrainian Armed Forces General Staff released a crucial update that changed the course of events. The Donetsk region was allegedly the target of 10 attacks by the Ukrainian Air Force. The Ukrainians' airstrikes, which also hit the city of Bakhmut, significantly altered the course of events in these regions because throughout the past few days, Ukrainian forces had made significant headway in Bakhmut. Hanna Maliar, the Deputy Minister of Defense for Ukraine, reported that her troops had advanced in Bakhmut by about 3 kilometers. The Ukrainians have now gained the upper hand in Bakhmut airspace as a result of these attacks by the Ukrainian Air Force. In actuality, the Russians are in a very hazardous situation. This is due to the fact that fighting is still ongoing in both the Bakhmut city and the Donetsk region at the time. In other words, it is because of these attacks that the Ukrainian Air Force is aware of the Russian forces in and near Bakhmut. We might witness considerably more serious ground attacks from the Ukrainian military in the hours or days to come as a result of the transfer of this crucial details to the Ukrainian troops on the ground. Kiev was worried about retaliatory measures after the Ukrainian Air Force launched 10 airstrikes on Russian targets in Donetsk and 4 attacks on Russian anti-aircraft missile installations. You are aware that the Russian military uses retaliatory attacks to exact revenge whenever the Ukrainians engage in overt offensive actions or move their soldiers forward. The events that followed the Ukrainian Air Force's bombings in the Donetsk region were exactly what we had predicted. In response to the strikes, Russia took action. The Russian Federation launched a significant attack on Ukrainian territory, utilizing Shahd-136-131 attack UAVs built in Iran, just 1 day after the Ukrainian Air Force carried out 10 airstrikes. However, the Ukrainian Army's air defense systems intercepted the Russian airstrikes. 25 Russian Shahd-136-131 unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs built in Iran, were shot down, according to Ukrainian defense personnel. Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, and the Kremlin were taken aback by these remarks because the Russians launched these drone attacks to thwart Donetsk's victory and to effectively counteract the Ukrainian army progress in Bakhmut. Putin's plans, however, were successful this time. In other words, all of the Russian UAVs were destroyed by the Ukrainian air defense forces. Following the operation, much more in-depth information concerning the Russian drone assault started to flow in. Along with Shahd, the Russians also employed other varieties of unmanned aerial vehicles in their attacks. As we have already informed you, 19 of the 25 UAVs were Shahd-136-131 models produced in Iran. research efforts are currently being made to identify the type of the 4 additional fallen Russian UAVs. The 2 unmanned aerial vehicles that the Ukrainian military shot down turned out to be Orlan 10. Additionally, these Russian drone attacks coincided with a crucial military operation on the same day that they delivered 25 UAVs. The Russians also sent 3 cruise missiles to Ukraine. However, the Ukrainian air defense systems also destroyed the Russian cruise missiles before they could reach their targets. The failure of Russia in its air and ground offensive operations has raised concerns in Moscow because, as we just said, Ukraine has made great progress, particularly in Bakhmut and the nearby front lines. Zelensky's forces are advancing significantly at Bakhmut and other crucial front lines in Donetsk with each passing day. However, the situation on the Russian side is one of regression and high casualties, which will make Putin uneasy rather than one of advancement. So what transpired with the Russian army, particularly during the war's pivotal moments? Why at the time the battle started, did Putin's men begin the phase of collapse? According to a recent intelligence assessment, the majority of Russia's ground forces in Ukraine are mobilized. Poorly trained reservists who are becoming more and more reliant on outmoded weapons. According to the UK Ministry of Defence's most recent report on the situation, many of the units in Russia's Combined Forces Group are incredibly poor and frequently carry out relatively simple infantry-based operations, even though it still has more than 200,000 people. The UK ministry said that Russia's group of forces is probably unable to execute efficient military operations along the whole front line. We know that the Russian armed forces deployed in Ukraine at the commencement of the war effort in February 2022 included trained soldiers and more advanced vehicles. Additionally, intelligence assessments and military updates show that these Russian personnel engaged in intricate, cooperative actions within the aforementioned time frame. However, the situation for these Russian soldiers right now is dire. Nearly 200,000 Russian army soldiers have been killed or wounded. Russia's military forces in Ukraine struggled with inadequate training, low morale, and claims of inadequate or diminishing supply of weapons throughout the conflict. Even if we merely look at the statics of both armies and how they have changed over time, it is still apparent that the Ukrainian troops unexpectedly gained the upper hand and the Russian army suffered a humiliating defeat. In actuality, the Russians also made a sizable contribution to the Ukrainian army's success. Some of these contributions include the fact that during the early weeks and months of the conflict, Russia committed many of its more elite soldiers to their untimely deaths and gradually restocked its forces with less skilled recruits as the invasion campaign dragged on. Military estimates, on the other hand, indicate that this hazardous situation arises as Moscow keeps launching counterattacks against Russian forces in the eastern Ukrainian city of Bakhmut, while anticipating a more all-out offensive by Kiev's armed forces as Ukrainian soldiers vow to stop Russian troops from occupying the village. The city saw some of the worst fighting of the conflict. However, given how poor and critical the Russian army situation is, if these fights go on much longer, we might possibly witness an unexpectedly significant win for the Ukrainian forces because no army has infinite military resources. In this sense, the Russian army is also currently on the point of extinction. Operation against the Russian army is being carried out by the Ukrainian army from practically all angles. The fighting in Ukraine grew hotter as the cold winter months began to give way to a warm spring. The Russian port area in Tersy Krasnodar Oblast and the Russian military airbase in Yeysk are only two of the recent Russian targets that the Ukrainian army has attacked. Let's look at these attacks. Breathtaking features together. Winter weather and unsuitable terrain for field combat forced the two countries engaged in combat to resort to trench warfare. Artillery, missile, and UAV attacks. The Ukrainian army's artillery batteries, which were equipped with 155mm howitzers and HIMARS during the winter, severely damaged the Russian army. In addition, the Ukrainian army, which defends itself against Russian air attacks with cutting-edge air defense systems it purchased from Western nations, exerted pressure on Russia using its own UAV capability. Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, had great faith in air defense systems, but this faith was misplaced. The attack by the Ukrainian army on 2 Russian air sites before the new year, as well as the UAV attacks on Russian forces in the Crimea, revealed a significant gap in the Russian air defense. Putin removed numerous army leaders and attributed this lapse in air defense to his commanders. This served as a sort of scapegoat for the Russian people throughout the conflict. Putin repeated doing this. Sergei Surovikin, the last appointed commander of the Ukrainian troops, was removed from his position as a result of the army's incapacity and his failure to win any ground in Ukraine. This Russian army's trembling was effectively used by Ukraine. This stumbling influenced its operations both in front of the line and across the border, giving the Ukrainian army the advantage over the Russian army. What should the Ukrainian army do to keep up its advantage? Then, the Ukrainian army's firepower has reached extreme limitations, and Russia has essentially no equipment, weaponry, or personnel to match this firepower. The Russian army is attempting to send these soldiers to Ukraine by relying on its forces outside of Ukraine. The Ukrainian army keeps attacking important regions of Russia in an effort to thwart these initiatives. An oil depot in the Russian coastal city of Krasnodar territory caught fire and experienced an explosion the previous morning. The Rosneft company's oil depot's infrastructure was damaged as a result of the drone strike. Although the precise number of drones involved in the attack on the oil depot was not made public, it is clear from images of the local community that the strike had very negative effects on the oil storage site. The neighboring residents' photographs revealed that the fire that ignited following the explosion was pretty powerful. Its effects lingered for quite some time, and from many kilometers away, flames and a massive pillar of smoke could be seen. The type of drones used for the attack by the Russian authorities was not disclosed, although it was alleged that pieces of drones carrying significant amounts of plastic explosives were discovered on the Belgorod area many hours before to the strike. The amount of the Rosneft oil facility damage is still unknown, but the UAV's arrival in the Krasnodar region has once again demonstrated how inadequate the Russian air defense is. The drones, which the Kremlin claims were launched by Ukraine, flew far into Russian territory, including some that came as close as 100 kilometers to Moscow, exposing gaps in the country's defenses at a time when President Vladimir Putin had ordered heightened security. What do Ukraine's numerous drone assaults suggest then? However, yesterday's strikes raised concerns about Russian defensive capabilities, despite the fact that officials claimed the drones did not result in any injuries or serious damage. The right of Ukraine to attack any Russian target was emphasized by Ukrainian officials who did not immediately admit responsibility, but also refrained from doing so for earlier strikes and acts of sabotage. Putin did not mention a specific incident, but his remarks came after drones had targeted different locations in the south and west of Russia. Authorities blocked the airspace around St. Petersburg after receiving reports of what they believed to be drones. Once more, Russian officials issued a missile attack warning and claimed responsibility for the hacking incident. Local Russian officials claimed that the drone attacks were directed at regions farther within Russia and along its border with Ukraine. Less than 100 kilometers from Moscow, close to the village of Gorbatov, a drone crashed, although it probably targeted a piece of infrastructure used by civilians. The drone did not inflict any harm. Pictures of the UAV revealed that it was a little 800-kilometer range type built in Ukraine that was not designed to carry a lot of bombs. Another Ukrainian drone was allegedly shot down over the Bryansk region, according to Russian military. According to local officials, 3 drones also attacked the Belgorod area of Russia, with one of them flying through a window of an apartment building in the capital. Buildings and automobiles reportedly sustained minor damage from unmanned aerial vehicles. According to Russian pundits, Ukraine was trying to strike from behind the lines, with the drone strikes inflaming tensions in Russia and showcasing its capacity to galvanize the Ukrainian populace. According to some Russian military blogs, the raids could represent a practice run for a more significant and ambitious strike. Drone operations may signal further assaults against Russia that would follow an attack by Ukraine. This strike will probably include UAVs striking sites behind Russian lines. It is obvious that Ukraine is working to increase the range of its UAVs. The second largest city in Russia, St. Petersburg, and all arrivals and departures at Pulkovo, the main airport, have been halted, according to officials. Once more, the move's cause was not given by the authorities. However, some Russian publications stated that an unidentifiable drone was to blame. Russian authorities regularly claim to have shot down Ukrainian drones over the Crimean Peninsula. Last year, the Russian military claimed in December that Ukraine employed drones to attack 2 long-range bomber bases located deep within Russian territory. Putin ordered the FSB, Russia's primary security organization, to strengthen protection along the country's border with Ukraine. The strikes in Ukraine appear to have angered Russians. This may be Ukraine's straightforward way of telling the Kremlin that they are in a stronger position in the conflict. An air raid alert disrupted the programming of multiple TV channels and radio stations in various locations, which was another development that increased anxieties throughout Russia. According to the Russian Ministry of Emergency Situations, it was a hoax brought on by the hacking of radio and television station servers in several regions of the nation. Putin and other Kremlin officials are concerned about Russia's inadequate air defense and inability to guarantee air security, although it is unclear exactly how many kamikaze UAVs the Ukrainian army possesses. We can claim that the quantity is significant. One possibility with this UAV army is that Ukraine would launch a strong assault to put an end to the conflict. Although Ukraine's allies claim that cross-border operations will intensify the conflict in this instance, they should nonetheless assist Ukraine and give it all the necessary weapons. If not, this conflict will raise